12 and 13. I said we're going to be doing 2 verses. We're going to pray in, and then we will read it and get into the study. So, Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. I thank you for the time that we have here together. I pray you will open this to us, Lord, and that you will give us the wisdom to truly understand this, and the heavenly ability to carry out those things that you have for us. That we wouldn't try to carry out your instructions on our own power, Lord. That we would rely solely on you and what you would have for us, Lord. Amen. All right, so just gonna break it down that way. So verses 12 and 13, these are spots in your love feasts, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. They are clouds without water, carried about by the winds, late autumn trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots. Raging waves of the sea, foaming up their own shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. So again, main point, I want to give some background. I've debated where I wanted to throw this in. This is probably as good a place of any. We're actually going to talk about the Gnostics, the Gnostic teachers, the apostates, and what these people were actually preaching and teaching, and the things that they were trying to bring into the church. I figure this is probably as good a place of any to actually have that background there. Then we're going to get a series of 5 descriptions of these false teachers and the way that they live their lives. They are spots at love feasts. They are clouds without water. They are trees without fruit. They are raging waves, and they are wandering stars. We're going to go over each of those and sort of what the characteristics associated with those are. And we're going to talk about, again, the context in Jude, and then ultimately what it means for us. And the unfortunate thing is that this is extremely applicable today, and I think you'll see that as we go along. So the main point, if you recall from last week in verse 11, we talked about the path of apostates, how these people go from actually having the truth to saying, nope, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to do my own thing. It starts by trying to establish righteousness by your own works. Then you get institutionalized religion from those works. And then you ultimately have to rebel openly against God and those that, follow after him. We're now going to examine the lives that these people lead. They claim that they're, following God. They claim that they've got the truth. They claim that they've got all kinds of, the right path. Great. Jesus tells us to examine a tree and know it by its fruits. What is the actual fruit of their life? They cause division. They cause confusion. They cause strife everywhere that they go. They make promises that they can't keep. And ultimately, their way leads to death. So if you want to know them by their fruit, that's their fruit. So to the people in Jude, this is going to be a reminder, and probably more appropriately a warning not to, be snookered by these guys, not to fall for what they're preaching. We're going to find that the lessons here still apply today. There's nothing new under the sun. And when we talk about these people, you'll realize how very similar it is to many things that are still taught today. We need to be very careful who we actually listen to. And I put Acts 17:11 up there. Be like the Bereans. They didn't just believe everything that Paul the Apostle told them. No, they said, hey, that's really cool. Glad you told me. Let's go to the scriptures. Let's see if that's true. Yep, it matches up. I guess that's correct. They didn't just automatically believe it. I don't care if I'm saying it. I don't care if Pastor Ray's saying it. I don't care if Slade is saying it. I don't care if your favorite teacher on the radio is saying it. Check it by the Bible. If it checks out, praise God, you've got something. If not, throw it away because it probably doesn't matter. All right, we're going to talk about the Gnostics. This was hardly the only sort of false teaching that was going on at the time. This was definitely one of the major ones. And if you read Colossians, for example, that is pretty specifically what is being pointed out. So what are the Gnostics? In the broadest general terms for us here, they were a mix of Eastern mysticism, their weird ideas of philosophy, the pagan mystery religions at Greece at the time, as well as Jewish legalism. So from Eastern mysticism, you would pull in a lot of really weird ascetic practices like yoga, for example. You would get a lot of their philosophies where you start getting into the nature of the body and the soul. Sometimes you would pull in reincarnation, things like that. One of the big ones I want to focus on is the pagan mysteries and Jewish legalism. You're probably gone to enough Bible teachings to understand that that word mysterion for mystery is not the way we look at it today. It wasn't, a hidden thing like a mystery novel. It's not who done it. It's a revelation of something, and now that guy done it. It's that kind of a thing. But there was far more to it than that. The mystery religions and a mystery wasn't just a secret. It was actually a series of rites, rituals, and ceremonies, often associated with a particular symbol that initiate would be given if they participated in that rite. That rite had a couple sort of goals associated with it. The first is you would basically enact this ritual that was often a reenactment of some part of their religion or their mythology or something like that. There could be sexual practices involved. There could be all sorts of weird gobbledygook mixed in there. But that was the first point, is that you would reenact that. The second thing that it would do is it was very similar in a functional perspective to sort of the Catholic Church in the medieval times, where you would basically sell indulgences. The idea is if you went and you did these various rites, well, that's going to placate the gods, and your soul is going to become more pure, and you're going to get out of purgatory sooner. That was the second idea there. When you had again initiated into kind of the first level of those mysteries, that then made you eligible at some future point to go up to a higher level of those mysteries, and so on and so forth. And that was the way that they would teach you and give you more of what they kind of actually believe. That was kind of how it progressed. For those of you that have studied Freemasonry and the various rites associated with it, yeah, that's almost identical to the way that they do that. For example, if you become a 15th level Freemason, one of the rites that they'll have you do is, like essentially Moses of the burning bush, where you'll have someone kind of go behind a bush and pretend to be God calling out from the bush, and you'll have, someone in the circle. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of weird looks here. I'm not making this up. Yeah, that's the correct. Yeah, that's the correct opinion to have of a lot of this. And then they would take the Jewish legalism and mix that in. The idea that circumcision makes you more holy, that you have to keep certain specific diets associated with all of that. Anyway, all of that gets kind of mushed up into these Gnostics. They would not say that they were directly contradicting the faith. They would say, oh, we totally believe in Jesus. We totally, follow all those teachings, but they're just elevating it to a higher level. They've got some other knowledge or what have you that, surprise, surprise, ends up contradicting what Jesus actually taught. They would often worship angels as intermediaries to God, very similar to the way a lot of people worship saints or pray to them. In the Gnostic way of looking at things, I've got a little diagram there. You've got God at the top, but we have a problem because God is holy. Now, if God is holy and there's obviously evil on the earth, how could a holy God have evil on the earth? Or how could, God create, something that's evil? So instead of just going back to Genesis and reading about the fall, what they've come up with is that God abstracted himself away from creation, and he instead had these things called aeons, which were basically emanations away from himself. And those were like your angels, your archangels, your various other powers or angelic beings. Christ, in their way of looking at things, was one of those aeons. And this is where you would get sort of two different divisions within the Gnostics. You would have one sect that saw him as simply an aeon. He was simply a phantom. He had no humanity. This is where you would get the idea where Jesus would walk along the seashore and there would be no footprints behind him because he wasn't really there. He was just a spooky ghost kind of thing. The other group basically said that he was a human, but that Christ as an aeon came upon him at his baptism and then left at his crucifixion, because obviously you couldn't have, a holy emanation of God take on the sins of humanity. Obviously you can't have that. So that was sort of the two classes that they fell into when looking at that. So they considered all matter as being evil. The functional extent of all of that is that because all matter is evil, it didn't really matter what I did in my body, because obviously me, I am my soul, spirit, etc. Therefore, I can sin as much as I want because it's already evil. it doesn't really matter what I do. That was basically the way that they saw the world and everything about that. You will find elements of this still, particularly in the Christian Sciences, as well as in many cases Scientology as well. And I think we also talked about Freemasonry as well. So you will still find these ideas taught a lot in various ways. By and large, cults generally attack kind of three things. It will either be the nature of Christ, somehow trying to deny him his godhood. They will attack the love and intimacy of the Father, saying that he's abstracted, he's removed from you, he doesn't actually care, he's just sort of an ethereal force, what have you. That's the very Eastern mysticism sort of way of looking at things. Or they will attack the person of the Holy Spirit, say that he's just some sort of strange force. He's not actually, there as a person or a personality. If you believe in God, if you say you believe in God, then that necessitates that you believe who he actually is and everything about him. Otherwise, you don't actually believe in God. If you say that you believe in Paul Miller, then you have to, of necessity, believe everything about me. If you say that you believe in Paul Miller, who was, born in New Mexico, joined the Marine Corps, and now works at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, yep, that checks out. That's Paul Miller. If you say you believe in Paul Miller, who was, born in New Mexico, joined the Air Force, and now works at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, I don't know what Paul Miller that is, but that's not me. It's the same thing here. You have to believe in the same God. It doesn't matter if it looks like the same God. If it's not, then it's not. So, yeah. Anyway, so this is what the Gnostics actually believe. This is what they were teaching. And when you read things like Colossians or 2 Peter or even here in Jude, where he's talking about some of the practices that they're teaching, trying to get people into some sort of higher knowledge or what have you, or talking about or kind of refuting a lot of those legalist practices, this is the kind of stuff he's actually talking about. As a side tangent to this, you will often, particularly around Easter or Christmas time, hear a lot of people or a lot of news stories come out about some secret hidden gospels that, we've just found this new thing somewhere, and this was kept out of the Bible, and blah, blah, blah. What they're talking about is the Gnostic Gospels, primarily things like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of, no, it's not Enoch. There's a few of them I can't remember off the top of my head. That's what those are. If you ever bother to sit down and read those, it'll be abundantly clear to anyone who has the Holy Spirit that those are not, in fact, inspired, because they are insane, is the only way that I can put that. They are not meant to be clear. If you read the Bible, 99% of it is pretty straightforward. You don't need to really think about it much to understand what he's talking about. Sometimes there's a cultural thing that maybe gets lost, or there's an allusion to something we may not understand. But by and large, it's pretty clear. Because they were all about the whole higher knowledge and keeping knowledge from you, it would be extremely difficult for you to actually read, and you would have to go through all of their little rites and rituals to figure out what they actually believed. You would also have things such as the ending of the Gospel of Thomas. They didn't like the fact that women were the first to see Jesus resurrected, so they basically retconned all of that. And I'm not going to make up the following. You can check it out if you want. The way that they look at the resurrection is on that morning, Pilate and the centurion, all of those people, Herod and the Sanhedrin, they all come out to the tomb and they're gathered around, and then magically the tomb opens itself up, and then the cross comes out and then starts inflating and rising up to heaven and says that he is not here, and then goes up from there. This is the stuff that they believe. So whenever you come across someone who's like, they kept secret hidden books out of the Bible, this is the kind of stuff they kept out of the Bible, because it's obviously wrong. Anyway, that's what they actually believed. Incidentally, those books were also written well after the fact. They wouldn't have been contemporaneous with here, but it's the same spirit. Anyway, back to Jude. Spots at love feasts. What were love feasts? This was essentially a conglomeration of communion and what we would think of as a potluck. They would basically get together, they would do the Lord's Supper, do communion, all of that, and they would also sit down, have a good meal together in fellowship like you do with a potluck. That was basically what was going on. These guys were also showing up there pretending to be just like everybody else, but there was a problem. first of all, you've got a hidden danger here. We're told by Jesus to, look out for the wolves in sheep's clothing. They're here pretending to be just like everybody else, but they are a hidden danger. There's two kinds of dangers. If there's a danger and you know it's there, you can actually deal with it. If there's a hidden danger and you don't know it's there, that's a lot harder to deal with because you don't know that there's any danger there. This was supposed to be a time of communion and fellowship. We get from here as well as in 1 Corinthians, which if you want to preemptively turn there, it will be helpful, that they were not going by this. We can infer, serving only themselves, that at the physical level, at least, that they were doing the same kind of things we see in the Corinthian church, where they were just going around and eating everybody else's food, which is a problem because in many cases, especially if you were a slave, this was literally the only good meal that you would probably get. And these guys are going around taking everyone else's food. At a spiritual level, these people and their teachings, as we talked about last week, they're only serving themselves. They're not, serving everyone else. There's no agape there. If you want to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I'm going to start in verse 27. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. Now, before we go on, I want to point out, it doesn't say who is unworthy, does it will be unworthy of it. It says who does it in an unworthy manner. Everyone is, when we get down to it, unworthy to have communion with God. That's kind of the whole point. It's if you do it in the right manner or not. I will kind of illustrate it with the following. If we think back, you've got a feudal king with all of his, nobles and lords around him, and they're throwing a grand old feast, and the king decides, I'm going to just invite in a random peasant to come and feast with us. If that peasant comes in there and he's very grateful and he's thankful, he's giving, the correct, obeisance to the king, and, he clearly knows that he doesn't belong there, but he's grateful anyway. Hey, he's doing it correct. He's, there, but he's, doing it the way he's supposed to be doing it. If, however, that peasant comes in there and he's strutting around pretending that he's a lord and having everyone else bow down to him, like, what are you doing? You're doing it in an unworthy manner. Sure, you were invited here, but you're not acting right. You're a show off. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat the bread and drink the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. So this is something we need to be very careful of. For this reason, many are weak and sick among you, and many asleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. There's a lot going on there. I'm not going to claim to dissect that verse entirely, but yeah, it would seem that there is some actual physical consequence to us incorrectly going about the manner of communion. Therefore, my brethren, when you come together, wait for one another. Here he's talking about the love feast and stuff. But if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. And the rest I'll set in order later. He's basically saying, hey, if you want to eat and have a big old party and feast, go do that on your own time. We're here for something else. Don't be sitting there trying to eat all of the food by yourself. So that's the first problem there. The second that Jude points out is they feast without fear. They don't really care about what God has actually said, nor do they care about what other believers say. They don't care about what God says, because clearly if they did, they wouldn't be acting the way they are, and they wouldn't be teaching what they are. And they don't really care about what other believers say. They don't care when they're called out by other people, if in fact they are called out. Again, I would point out in verse 3, Jude says that these men snuck in unawares. The only way that I can see that they would sneak in unawares and act the way that they are is if everyone else was acting in a really similar manner. So why was there no fear? Was there weakness in the church? I can see that to a certain extent. No one really wants to raise a stink there. No one wants to be told that they're not acting in Christ-like love. Maybe these people were, like the Corinthians, and they thought this was somehow, part of their Christian liberty or something like that. And they were just getting that whole issue confused. But at the end of the day, they just have no fear of God. They don't. They don't really care what he has to say. They're totally given over to themselves and their weird teachings and coming up with ways to justify it. And they don't really care what God has to say. There's no fear of God. There's no fear of his judgment in them. Serving only themselves. Again, this could be literal, referring to their love feast, but I think it also does refer to the way that they're teaching people and the things that they're having them get into. There's no agape in these people's lives. There's no actual caring about others. There's no being totally given over to others. It's totally self-serving. I've got up there the acronym JOY, Jesus, others, you. I was told that I was very young by my mother. It's one of the best things I ever learned. If you want to have joy in your life, put Jesus first, then put others second, and then, if there's time left, deal with yourself. That's joy. Spots at your love feast. That's the first problem these guys had. Second problem, they are clouds without water. If you are a cloud, you should, have rain associated with that. You should also bring shade, and you need to help for growing crops. That's something that these people would have especially been very attuned to. Us, unless you're a farmer, you don't really care about the rain. In fact, in a lot of cases, you may not even want rain because, it leads to flooding or what have you. No, rain was absolutely a necessity there. The apostates don't do this. They have all kinds of promises. Again, if you get back to what they were actually teaching and a lot of the weird things that they were promising that, oh, hey, I know the Bible is really cool, but we've actually got like these special other things over here. And you learn this, you're going to be like super spiritual and holy. That's essentially what they were promising, but they couldn't actually fulfill it because they didn't actually have anything from God. It was just stuff that they had come up with. They promise a path to God, but it only leads to enslavement because now you're ultimately going to be, sinning in some variety that's ultimately going to enslave you in that sin. Or you're just going to be stuck in your various rites and rituals that we had talked about. Another thing that they were really big into is the various diets that you would have to keep because, having some sort of diet would make you more holy or whatever. Well, guess what? If I don't want to keep that diet, now all of a sudden that's a thing that I have to do, and that's another burden that I have to, have put on me. They're promising prosperity, generally in a spiritual sense, but sometimes in a monetary sense, but it's only bringing poverty and enslavement. They promise life, but it ultimately brings death. They don't actually have what they want. They're only concerned ultimately about the physical, despite what they may say about caring about the spiritual or the higher, level of things. We learn by the conduct of these people, they're very much tied to, what's going on around them. That's actually what they care about. They're carried about by the wind. Let's go to Proverbs. Talking about something similar here, but Proverbs 25, verse 14. It says, whoever falsely boasts of giving is like clouds and wind without rain. These people were falsely boasting. They were talking about all the great revelations and all the really interesting new things that they've got. Incidentally, when you see in Jude and elsewhere, it talks about the gospel or the salvation that was given once and for all. This is one of the things that it's talking about. The idea was that, hey, we have all of the revelation that's necessary. There's not another secret hidden level of knowledge and revelation. That's a difference between what's taught in the Bible, what's taught by Jesus, and what was taught by these false teachers. Jesus was very open and honest about everything that was going on there. These false teachers, no, there was always something hidden. There was always something else that you had to get to. It's not the case here. It's all here, in black and white. At that time, it was clear as Greek. So these people, they're also carried about by the winds, which means they lack consistency. So they just kind of go wherever. If there's some new thing that gets merged into their teachings, guess what? It's going to get merged in there too. In fact, that's actually the history of pagan religions by and large. Is, hey, I've got my God and you've got your God. Okay, I guess they're part of the same pantheon now. Cool, yay. Rarely would they stop to consider, wait a second, maybe there's something wrong here. No, they just, oh, yep, that's it, cool, we'll just merge them together, everyone's happy now. So they would lack consistency. Every new idea or doctrine they would come to, they would, bring into their little circle. They would also, in many cases, provoke pointless arguments. If you go to Titus, chapter 3, verse 9, this is just general instruction to Titus, but to the church in general. It says, avoid foolish disputes, genealogies, contentions, and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and useless. Number one, there's a lot of things that are worth arguing about. There's a much larger category of things that are not worth arguing about. Don't argue about it unless it actually matters, because it probably doesn't. Now, obviously, the things that the Gnostics were teaching, yeah, that actually matters. But in many cases, when you run into cultists even today, they'll have some tiny little point somewhere that maybe sounds good, and they'll try to build an enormous case based off of that. And as long as you follow their little script, because they generally have a script, you can follow their logic and they'll lead you where you want. Don't follow those stupid little meaningless points. You got to stick with the actual big point, the things that actually matter. Otherwise, you're going to go completely off sideways. Don't major in the minors. That's the way my dad puts it. I think that's a really good way of putting it. These people, they're carried about by the wind. They also prey on others. They leave whenever they've got what they wanted. They'll come in, they've got all sorts of new stuff. They're like Barnum and Bailey Circus, put on a grand old show, maybe have a few of their little disciples come along, and then whenever they've got what they want, they leave. That's it. And if there's a problem and they cause chaos in their wake, who cares? Not my problem anymore. They move on to the next group. They cause more death and destruction there and kind of keep moving on. They're like locusts. Trees without fruit. So there's three things here. There's no fruit. They are twice dead, and they are pulled up by the roots. So he specifically compares them to autumn trees. If you were an autumn tree, that was the time where you would harvest. You would expect, if it is a fruit tree, that it would have fruit. You go out there, right now, this is when a lot of people are harvesting. I would expect to find trees that have fruit on them. I would expect, vines to have some, fruit on them. I would expect, root vegetables to have, vegetables at the very end of that. These guys, however, they don't have any of that. They're a tree. They look like all the other trees, but there's no actual fruit there, which would make you wonder, wait a minute, what's wrong with that tree? Jesus said, actually, if we go to Matthew, chapter 7, speaking of false prophets in this case, starting in verse 15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. Fairly self-explanatory. A rose by any other name is still a rose. If I've got a rose bush, it should have roses on it. If I've got, a strawberry set of vines, I believe they're vines, guess what? I would expect strawberries to grow from that. These guys, they have no fruit. There's nothing in their lives that demonstrates that they actually know God. They may use all the right words. They may have all the right verbiage down. They may even raise their hands at the right time and say hallelujah with the right tone of voice. They don't actually know God. Apostates aren't actually new. This was, a phenomenon that they were experiencing then, and it's still an issue today. Again, the issue here is not one of maturity. I would expect, an immature believer to have problems. You got to kind of, move them along the right path. Again, it's like a little baby. You got to get them going right. It takes a long time. But again, that's not the issue here. We're not dealing with an issue of immaturity. This is people who know the truth, who have the truth, who have been given the truth and acknowledge that it is the truth, but have simply chosen to do something else. Yep. Remember, Cain, he had the truth. He chose to do something totally different. Balaam, he had the truth, chose to do something totally different. Korah had the truth. He was there at Mount Sinai when God said, this is the way we're doing things. And he chose to do something else entirely. So twice dead. There's a lot of different ways you can look at this. I just put 4 up there. They're dead on the surface and they're dead on the inside. There's nothing in their works on the surface that would demonstrate who they actually are, that they are actually following Christ. And there's, nothing in their spirit that would demonstrate that they actually have the Holy Spirit. They're going to die in this life and they're going to die in the next life. Everyone's going to die here, but, are you going to die in eternity? That's the more serious question. They're dead at the root and they have dead fruit. So obviously, because they have no fruit, there's something wrong somewhere else within them. I like this quote: those that are born twice die once, and those that are born once die twice. We have to be born again. I'm born that second time, guess what? I'm just going to die once, but then the second death has no power over me. However, if I'm only born once, I'm going to have physical death, and then I'm going to have an ultimate, final, spiritual death. They're twice dead. Pulled up by the roots. This is the only way you can actually deal with sin. I don't know if you've ever had to go and pull things out by the roots, or especially here in Maryland, pull up those vines that seem to go everywhere. I don't know what those things are. They go everywhere. Yeah, I had to pull those up a couple years ago, and it took so long. It was in the middle of summer. I did not like it. Yeah. It's amazing how far those will go. You'll start over there, and then you'll be like 40 feet somewhere else. You got to pull them completely out by the roots. That's really the only way to deal with sin, and it's really the only way to deal with this. You can't deal with one thing. You got to deal with the actual heart of the matter. And as we talked about, one of the things that they consistently deny is Jesus. I kind of keep coming back to this whenever I think about not just false teachers, but kind of anyone who isn't actually saved. Just completely cut through whatever the surface level issue is that they're talking about, and just be like Peter. If you go to Mark chapter 8, verse 27, this is going to be Peter's confession, but it really gets to the heart of the matter. It says, "Now Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. On the road, he asked his disciples, saying to them, 'Who do men say that I am?' So they answered, 'John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets.' He said, 'But who do you say that I am?' Peter answered and said, 'You are the Christ.'" And he was strictly warned not to tell anyone about that. Yeah, if you really want to cut through whatever someone's talking about and figure out where they actually are, who do you say that Christ is? Who is that? If you would ask any of these Gnostics, they can hem and haw all they want, but at some point they would have to come back to, he was just like some weird phantom guy. And then, all right, cool. I know what's going on now. I know who I'm dealing with. You're not going to deal with all these other weird issues. You're not going to deal with, even today, what does this word in Greek mean? What does this weird little thing here mean? What is all this other little stuff that most people are not going to be able to answer, even if they are, very good, because I don't think of that way, or I haven't come across that one specific thing. No, just cut through all of it. Who do you say that Christ is? Well, I don't think he actually existed. Good. Then nothing that we have to say matters at this point, because you haven't gotten the first point. We can't go any further. And then once that's dealt with, once the actual problem is dealt with, then we can go from there. So yeah, don't get caught up in the ancillary issues. Again, what Paul was talking about in Titus. Don't get involved in various disputes about genealogies. Don't get involved in pointless arguments. Figure out what the actual heart of the matter is, and then start dealing with it on that basis. Get to the actual foundation. Yeah, don't follow the script of what they actually want to talk about. Talk about what you want to talk about. Raging waves that foam up their own shame. So waves are interesting. If you think about it, a wave is constantly going, and it's constantly breaking against whatever's in the side of it. If you want to imagine like the cliffs of Dover or whatever, you've got these big, massive cliffs, and you've got the waves constantly, beating up against it. If you can think of it this way, those waves are constantly trying to get out of wherever they are. In fact, we're told in Job that God determined the bounds of them. That God has specifically put them there. If we think about it in that way, these waves are constantly trying to get out of wherever God actually put them. They're constantly beating against that wall or that boundary. All apostates are trying to get out of whatever authority is actually over them. Remember, that's one of the features that they have. We talked about previously how they don't want people over them. They don't want authority over them. They're always trying to break out of that. They don't respect those, and they're constantly speaking evil against those that are over them. Same thing here. They're constantly trying to break out of wherever they happen to be. Because of that, they're constantly causing problems. I don't know if you've ever been surfing or gone through very rough waves before, but they can be quite intense sometimes. Waves are always going. They have no rest. There's no calmness to the sea. They're constantly there. They're constantly breaking. They're constantly turning something up. And because they have no rest, they obviously don't know God. Jesus promised that he will give us rest. these raging waves, not just waves, but raging waves, they have no rest. And because they have no rest, they can't bring anyone else rest. You can't take a boat in a stormy sea and have it sit there flat. Even the largest, most powerful ships are still going to get tossed about a lot. They foam up their own shame. They say a lot of great things, but their lives say otherwise. If we go to James, but do you not know, foolish man, that faith without works is dead? We're not going to talk about exactly what he's talking about here. He's basically talking about the outworkings of your faith and demonstrating what you actually believe. But these people, they say that they have, God. They say that they're saved. They say that they're just like one of us, but their lives say something different. In fact, their teachings would also say something different. It's amazing when you look at their teachings, both then and now, and a lot of false teachers around us, you realize that the things that they're teaching are just ways to justify what they want to have and what they want to get in the sin in their own lives. Whenever you look at these, health and wealth, prosperity, gospel kind of people, why are they preaching you can get a lot of money? Because they want a lot of money. They're greedy. When you look at these Gnostics and they're teaching that you can go and have sex with whoever you want because it doesn't really matter anyway, what do they want? They want to go have sex with whoever they want, and they're finding a way to justify it. They're foaming up their own shame. I always get a little disturbed when, pastors aren't teaching against sin, because you gotta wonder if maybe there's some sin in their life. It should be obvious that every act that these people are doing is shameful. It should have been obvious to the people that Jude is talking about that these people are not right with the Lord. Yet many people just didn't have discernment. In a lot of cases, I think a lot of them were living not the same lives, but very similar lives. Again, I would point to the church at Corinth as being an example of a church that was completely, totally backwards in everything that it was doing. I found a quote. This is actually a quote from Albert Speer, who was basically Hitler's architect and his minister of munitions and a whole bunch of other positions. He said, "One seldom recognizes the devil when he's putting his hand on your shoulder." I thought that was a really good quote to put here. Sometimes it's really easy to intellectually identify that, yep, that person is not saved. He's into some really weird stuff. But then he kind of comes up right next to you and you friends with them for a while. And then I've had this happen before where people I've known for a while, I was like, they're a little weird, but whatever. And then eventually I fully understood where they were. I'm like, nope, can't do this anymore. They preach sinful things because they want to kind of justify those sins, because that's what they're privately doing. They want to make it okay. They want to deceive themselves into thinking what they're doing is okay, and they want to bring as many people along so that everyone can participate in it as much as you want. It's amazing how many cults have that as their central pillar. One of the best examples I can think of that is actually the Moonies, if you're familiar with them. They were a cult started in South Korea. And I'm not going to get into their whole thing, but their whole shtick was everyone should go and have as much sex as you possibly can. And it was basically a sexual pyramid scheme that would go all the way up to the top. And that meant you were like more holy than the people below you. So they would have like these grand mass weddings, and the guy at the very top, Moon, he would have a whole bunch of sex with everyone else because he was super holy. And that was the way you got more holy. I did not do justice to that, but when you look at it, it was a sexual pyramid scheme. Why? Because that's what he wanted to do. He was foaming up his own shame. He was preaching filth because he wanted to have filth. Wandering stars. All right, I'm going to point out wandering stars. That word wandering is the word planetes. If you were, an ancient, you were looking up the sky, you would notice two sort of celestial bodies at night. You would see the stars. They're sitting there, they're fixed, they're always there, they're not moving. They technically are moving, but they wouldn't have noticed that. And then you would have the planets, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, etc. And when you would look at them through the night sky, they would actually move throughout the night sky. They kind of go in an elliptical orbit almost. That's because of the motion of the Earth as well as the motion of those planets relative to the Earth and the sun. That's why you would get that. And because they would take these sort of bizarre paths through the sky, they would call them the wanderers. They would call them the planetes, which is where we get our word planets. So that's what that actually means. That's the derivation of that word. So these people, they have no consistency. If you're that star, if I put it this way, you're one way and one way only, and that way is God. You can point on that. I can look up at the North Star every night and I know exactly where it is. I can look at the North Star. I can literally navigate across the seas by it. You can't do that with a planet. You can't say I'm going to, follow that planet and, get to where I'm going, because it's always going in a completely different direction. You follow these guys, you're going to get completely off course. You're not even going to realize that you're off course. But they wander about. They show up, they cause problems, and then they leave. If I look up at the night sky one time, star's right there. If I look up next night, oh, it's not there anymore. It's way over there. They're going to show up and leave. They don't really care about the harm they do along the way because, again, they're ultimately interested in themselves. They're not interested in other people. Wandering shows a lack of consistency. This can be seen in a person's belief. Do they believe the same thing that they believed previously? If you're involved in a lot of these, mystery rites, the answer would be no. Obviously, I don't believe in the same thing anymore because I've learned so much more. This isn't talking about, you shouldn't keep reading your Bible, learning more and more. That's not what I'm talking about. But, you would gain one set of knowledge with them, and then you open up this whole new panorama of other things that you didn't even know of or conceive of. So, no, they had no consistency. The same sort of thing is used today in a lot of those cults. You kind of keep getting more and more into, their knowledge. Oftentimes, you have to pay money to get, another set of that enlightenment. They're deceivers. So why would anyone actually follow these people? Well, I would point out that people follow deceivers since the very beginning. So it's not really a new phenomenon. One of the things that you learn about deception is kind of when you get down to it, all deception is really self-deception. I'm believing something because it's what I want to believe. Incidentally, I kind of did my master's thesis on this topic, so I actually do kind of know what I'm talking about here. The only reason lies tend to work is because they feed on something that we have within us that we want to be true. And because I want it to be true, I find a way to justify that lie. So even if that lie is not perfect, even if I'm sitting there and I think it's not quite right, I still want it to be true. So I'll come up with a way that is true, and then I'll just believe it. I've simplified it, but that's basically the mechanism. They say things that sound good, and they're talking to people that lack discernment. Very rarely, not all the time, but rarely will one of these cultists then or now try to, deceive someone who really knows what they're talking about. It's a disturbing thing to realize that outside a lot of the Billy and Franklin Graham crusade, sometimes the first people that those newly saved people would run into would be not people from a good church or whatever, but it would be the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they know that's a simple mark. We can get that person. They don't know anything yet. We can totally get them. That was one of the tactics that they would use in a lot of cases. Yeah. So they would lack discernment. Here's another interesting one. I haven't seen a lot of people look at it this way. I've only come across a couple people that have pointed this out. But if we go back to 1 Corinthians 11, Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, tells us for another reason why, at least God, in the macro sense, would let these false teachers continue to exist. Go to 1 Corinthians 11, verse 19. It says, "For there must also be factions, or more literally heresies, among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you." If you put it this way, this is, in a sense, God separating the wheat from the chaff. If there weren't these very obvious heresies pulling people out, then those same people that are getting deceived would be sitting here in the church all the time, and it'd be much harder to actually get anything done. But now it's almost acting like a little magnet, pulling out all those things that probably shouldn't be here in the first place. Now, in the ultimate sense, the full cleansing isn't going to happen until much later. We've talked about that previously, but this is one of the reasons why God continues to allow that, is almost as a cleansing function to the church, to basically say, nope, I want to get those things out of here as much as possible. So if that's the question shouldn't be, why do we have these? It's not why do we not have more of them? Why are they not taking more people out? I'm being a bit facetious when I say that, but it's something to think about. That is one of the reasons that God has allowed these. I've only seen a couple people point that out, but that is what that verse says. And it's even more clear in the Greek, because that word factions, it is literally heresies. So what's the ultimate fate of these people? They're reserved in the blackness of darkness forever. This is not talking about, a judgment here on earth. This is talking about the ultimate end of all things. This is talking about the final judgment. Yeah, this is talking about eternity. They wanted to rebel against God. They didn't want to be under him, so fine. He's going to separate him from them forever. He's going to give them exactly what they want. That's the really terrifying thing. They wanted to serve Satan instead, so they're going to share in his fate. God is giving them exactly what they asked for. He's giving them exactly what they wanted, but they're not really going to be happy about what they wanted. They sought enlightenment, and they're going to live in darkness forever. If this is their fate, then why would actually people choose to follow them? Again, we would rather go our own way. We would rather have our own sin. We would rather fall for our own temptation. We would rather think, as we're told of Moses, that he wouldn't, suffer the pleasures of sin for a season, but would be, counted among his people. They want to have the pleasures of sin for a season. That's what they want. They want to serve themselves and their desires, even if it's temporary. If you want to remember in Luke chapter 16 with the rich man and Lazarus, one of the most sobering things that I came to is that rich man is still there today. We read through that passage, a couple minutes, doesn't really take long. Maybe we have a sermon on it. We'll sit there for an hour listening to a sermon. He's still there. He's still wanting a drop of water on his tongue. They're reserving the blackness of darkness forever. And why did that rich man go there? It was because he wasn't taught. No, he had Moses and he had all the prophets. He had everyone else to tell him. He simply wanted to live his own life and fun and pleasure and sin. He didn't want anyone to tell him otherwise. Context in Jude. These apostates were a problem for doctrine. Obviously, we talked about some of their doctrine and why it was obviously ridiculous and wrong, but they were also causing true hurt and damage along the way. They were causing confusion to people. You can imagine if there was a new believer that just came into this church that Jude was writing to. They're believing God and they're having a grand old time, and this guy comes up to him and says, "Hey, I know that what they've got is really good, but you should really come with me on, Thursday or whatever. I'm going to show you this really interesting stuff that you've never heard about God before." And it's like, "Oh yeah, totally, I'll do this." And he shows up to, one of their ceremonies and he gets super confused and he has no idea what's going on anymore. It's like, have I actually been lied to this entire time? You can see why that would cause problems, especially for someone who's new in the faith. It would end up leading people astray. They're preaching just to justify their own sin. And ultimately, they're saying things that sound good, but they're not. If they're not going to take responsibility for their actions here, they're ultimately going to take responsibility for them in eternity. This is going to be a reminder to the people that Jude is talking to about just how dangerous these people are and the fact that they need to actually be on guard for them. This wasn't just a minor passing triviality. When you look through church history, this would form the struggle between what I'll call the true church and the Gnostics. It would form the backbone of their existence for the next basically 2.5 centuries. It would be a constant war back and forth between the two. And many of the very early church writings were dealing with this. Irenaeus's Against Heresies is exclusively devoted to refuting each and every one of their points in excruciating detail. So this was a very dangerous thing, and it went on for a very long time. And frankly, it never really went away. It's still there. It calls itself different things now, but it's still there. So lessons for us. He told them to know these people by their fruits. So what are our fruits? Are we obviously different from unregenerate people? Can people look at us and immediately tell the fruit of our lives? Is the fruit good? Is the fruit there? It's noticeable, but it's just sort of meh. If you've had an apple that you've bitten into it and it's kind of old and stale and dry, not a good apple. But if it's bite into it and it's very juicy and crisp, that's a really good apple. Sure, you may have fruit, but it's no. God planted you for a reason. He wants a lot of really good fruit from it. There's nothing new under the sun. all these heresies, they still exist out there in some way, shape, manner, or form. Again, they have rebranded themselves in many cases, but it's still the same thing that they believe. You believe that, Jesus is just an angel. Guess what? There's two major cults today that say that exact same thing. You've got the Jehovah's Witnesses and you've got the Mormons. It's the exact same thing. We need to ask God for wisdom and discernment. Again, James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask to God and he will give him liberally. It's one of my favorite verses. We need wisdom and we need discernment. Many times it is obvious when someone's teaching something completely out in left field and you can identify it. Sometimes it's not as obvious and you need to have that discernment. That's one of the reasons why we need to go back to the most basic thing of all. Who do you say that Christ is? If you get that answer, you get an actual honest answer from them, then you can really figure out where they're actually coming from. If they just believe something that's a little different from you, or maybe they've got a little different way of looking at it, or if they actually are a false teacher. By the way, calling someone a false teacher, that is an extremely serious charge. That's not something we should kind of throw around lightly. If you ask anyone at Calvary Chapel, like any actual pastor or teacher, if they've been called a false teacher, yeah, they've probably been called a false teacher. I've been called a false teacher. It's fun. Yes, I have. Don't worry about it. So,
I think you're excellent.
Regardless, that's not something we should throw around lightly. That is a very serious thing, because you're saying that you're apostate, that you're a sinner, you are going to hell, and you are trying to take everyone else with you. That's when you call someone a false teacher. So we need to be able to distinguish between, points of reasonable disagreement on, what a passage may actually happen to say, and stuff that actually matters. The problem within the church, by and large, is we tend to focus on the things that don't actually matter, because we've got our own little pet idea or thought or belief, and totally ignore the actual big things. This is how you'll allow false teachers to walk around in the church, doing their thing while everyone else is arguing about how the sound system should be set up, or just as a hypothetical example there. No, none of that actually matters. Let's focus on what actually matters. So yeah, I would say that's the main lesson for us. We need that wisdom. We need that discernment. We need to do a critical self-examination of the fruit in our lives. Is it actually obvious, and how good is it? With that said, let's pray out. Heavenly Father, I thank you for our time here together. I thank you for your word. I thank you that you have given us the ability to see what is real and what is not. I pray that you will show us those places in our lives where we are not pleasing to you, that you will show that to us, and will give us the willpower and the ability to change that, Lord, so that our fruit will be evident, visible, and more pleasing to you, Lord. I pray that you will give us wisdom and discernment to see the world and to see people the way that you see things, Lord. That we would not get caught up in minor disputes that are unprofitable, but that our energy would be focused where you would have it to be, that we focused on the Schwerpunkt, Lord. That it would be in things that actually matter, and that when we put our energy towards defeating false teachers, it would be done correctly and against the people that truly need to be taken down. That we wouldn't be doing it in our own power, but that would be through you, Lord. Amen. Next week we're going to continue in 2 verses. We're going to do 14 and 15, and we're going to get to kind of the oldest prophecy uttered by a man in the Bible. So that should be fun. So see you next week.
All right, thank you.